I would just like to mention, this isn't our usual lineup where the youth today are filling in some of these roles so that we get to participate, and that takes a lot of coordination, and there's been some hard work from Steve and Anthony, and especially Amanda and Greg, and they put in a lot of work into our youth program, and we have a really special program and a lot of special kids, and I know that Amanda has put in a lot of time and effort to allow us to do these things, and so I just wanted to say that I'm really appreciative of her. But why don't we go ahead and pray? Please bow your heads. Dear Lord, we come before you today humble and ready to worship. We've lifted up a lot of concerns and a lot of joys. And as we go into this message, please be with me to say what needs to be said, and be your mouthpiece today, Lord, and let the message be received with everyone in here, that it be what they need today. Amen. Okay, I'll ask if you would please turn to Luke 7:36 through 50. Okay. Now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, so he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more?" Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled." "Then you have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." I'm getting sniffly here. Okay. So what we have here is a party. The Pharisees, they haven't quite figured Jesus out yet. This is kind of early on in the gospel story, and so they haven't really quite pinned down what they're going to do about Jesus. Is this guy going to be someone that they can use as an ally, or is this going to be someone that they have to take care of? So whenever I started looking at this scene and picturing it, I sort of applied it to what it would be like if this was in high school. So I picture these Pharisees as like this self-proclaimed group of cool kids. There's not really a group of kids that everybody likes per se, but somewhere along in our lives, they've decided that they're the cool ones, and it's just carried on throughout the rest of high school. And then you have this new guy, and he's from another state or another school, and he's here, and everyone's super interested in him because he is the new and mysterious, and everyone's interested. And then you have this girl, But it's not really this girl, it's more like it's that girl, because everybody knows who she is and not for the right reasons. And so this new guy comes along, and these cool kids are like, all right, what are we going to do about this guy? I mean, if we just let him go about his way, then everyone's going to like him better than they like us. So they decide to throw him a party. And they're like, okay, if we throw him this party, he'll like us, he'll think that we're really great, and then he'll join our clique, and everything will be fine. And so they do that. But then whenever the guy shows up, they just kind of blow him off and ignore him, and they don't really pay any attention to him or actually be nice to him. But then that girl, she is so excited to see him that she brings him a present. Now, when's the last time that you brought somebody a present at a party that wasn't a birthday party just because you were excited to see them? So she takes this guy that she doesn't really know a present, and then whenever she sees him, she gets so excited that she starts crying to the point that she's getting him all wet. She is blubbering and freaking out all over this guy that she barely knows. And then to try to fix it, she takes down her hair and starts wiping him off with her hair to try to dry him off. Now that's really weird, and I can tell you I've never seen that happen at any party that I've ever been to. But the weirdest part is how Jesus reacts, because he doesn't freak out and say, who is this girl that's all over me? He defends her. Jesus says she was forgiven many, many sins, and so she is very, very grateful. If the forgiveness is minimal, the gratitude is minimal. And that's from verse 47 from the Message. It's easy to say that this woman needed to repay Jesus for being forgiven, or that the Pharisee thinks that he is perfect, but the woman knows that she has sinned. And so the difference between them is not that one is worse than the other. The difference is that whenever they approach Jesus, their hearts are in totally different places. The Pharisee is coming and saying, what can Jesus do for me? Because I already have everything figured out. Whereas the woman is coming to Jesus and saying, I need your help, and I know that you are the answer, and I know that you can forgive me. In verse 42, it says, neither of them could pay up. Both of these people were sinners. Neither of them were capable of cleansing their own sin. It was Jesus that could do that. So essentially in that way, they were on the same plane. They were both sinners. And like I said, the difference between the two is how they approached Jesus. If we don't offer ourselves, we won't be grateful. But if we, like the woman, come on our knees, offering ourselves to God, we will be grateful. This woman didn't just hear about Jesus in this party and decide to stroll in. She came there with intention. She probably wasn't even invited because she wouldn't have usually associated with these Pharisees. But somehow she ended up at this party and she was ready. She had a gift in hand, and whenever she saw him, she immediately started worshiping. And whenever she did start to worship, she was so overcome with love and joy for Jesus that she started to cry. And she's kissing his feet to the point that the tears are washing the dirt off of his feet. And then whenever the tears start to wash the dirt off of her feet, she takes down her hair that in 1 Corinthians is described as a woman's glory, and she wipes off his feet that nobody else at the party had bothered to wash. So what can we learn from this woman? The first thing is, she did not worship in order to be forgiven. She worshiped because she was forgiven. Whenever I first read this, I was a little bit confused because it seemed like this woman came to Jesus asking for forgiveness and showed him love, and then he did forgive her. But I know that that's not really how it works, so I decided that I went to try out John Wesley and see what he said. John Wesley's explanatory notes on the New Testament says, it should be carefully observed here in verse 47 that her love is mentioned as the effect and evidence, not the cause of her pardon. She knew that much had been forgiven her, and therefore she loved much. When this woman is there worshiping God, and the Pharisees come over and they say, you're a sinner, Jesus says, no, she is not a sinner. She is forgiven. She didn't stumble upon this party and find this guy and say, okay, if I can just get him to forgive me, then my life will be okay. She came to Jesus humble and knowing that he was the answer and that he had forgiven her for her sins. And as a result of that, she was expressing her love to him. And that's what true worship is about. It's about expressing our love to God. Jesus had shown her grace and mercy, so she was showing her love. Whenever I think about true worship, I'm reminded of my experience in Zimbabwe, which is fitting because my dad's going there in less than a couple weeks. But whenever I got to go to Zimbabwe a few years ago, on Sunday morning, we got to go to the church service at Old Mutare, where the hospital and the orphanage and the boarding school are. And because of that orphanage and boarding school being there, was a huge congregation of hundreds of people, and it was made up of almost entirely students. So it's a bunch of elementary school age and teenagers there, and they are there to worship God. And of course, this sermon and most of the songs were all in Shona, so I couldn't understand anything of what they were saying. But it almost had more of an impact on me for that reason, because I wasn't trying to digest what they were saying or interpret the meaning of it. I was just experiencing what was going on and embracing what they were doing. And these kids had so much joy in their hearts for Jesus, and whenever they were singing their praises, you could hear that joy. And that's what I think of whenever I think of true worship. And I see that in that woman, that whenever she saw Jesus, she immediately started worshiping and was moved to tears and was kissing his feet, regardless of what she was supposed to be doing. Her worship was personal, and what I mean by that, it was just between her and Jesus. She wasn't worried about the circumstances around her. She wasn't worried about her reputation or what the Pharisees were going to say. She just saw Jesus and reacted because of the love that she had in her heart. It reminds me of a little spiel, I guess you could call it, that a man at Crossroads Camp once told us. We were preparing for kind of a meditative worship time, and Michael was giving us a little spiel before he started. And one thing that stuck with me from that speech was he told us that sometimes whenever you're worshiping, it's good, and by worship in this context, I mean in a pew or praising, it's good to just sometimes close your eyes and cancel out everything around you. Forget about the cute baby across the aisle or your friend across the aisle, and forget about the stress and the things that you have to do at home. Cancel all that out and just focus on God, because that's what worship is. It's giving our thanks to God and giving our praises. And if we can just cancel everything out for just a few moments and focus on Him, we'll be able to have true worship. So before I close today, I just wanted to leave you with one more verse. It's from Romans 12, 1-2. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. And now we're having another song, I believe. All right, thank you.